Hey guys, so we are now starting a chapter on animal nutrition. Remember, earlier in the semester we talked about plant nutrition, and we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about the similarities between animal nutrition and plant nutrition, but just as plants need to get nutrients to different parts of their body, they have mechanisms to do that. Animals have different structures, but to perform similar functions of getting nutrients to different parts of their body and absorbing that and making sure that all of the cells are getting access to it. So we are mostly going to be talking about digestion and sort of the nutritional needs that animals need in this chapter. So as usual, I'm going to break this up into several smaller PowerPoint presentations, and initially we're first going to talk about just some general information about nutrition for animals, and then after that we'll talk about how food gets processed, and then we'll spend a bunch of time on mammalian digestion, which will look a lot like we're basically going to be using human digestion. And finally we'll talk about evolutionary adaptations of vertebrate digestion. So I think there's 4 PowerPoints probably that you'll have to watch. Okay, but first we're going to start out up here, the need to feed. So as animals are heterotrophs, that means that they have to consume food on their own, whereas plants are autotrophs and they can make their own food. Heterotrophs need to get their nutrition from the environment. So because of that, food has to be taken in, and after it's taken in, it has to be taken apart so that the pieces are in usable form, and then the animal has to take up the different parts of the food throughout its body. And this whole process is called animal nutrition. Based on the types of things that they feed on, animals fall into 3 different categories. They can be herbivores, and herbivores are plant eaters. So here's an example of an herbivore up here. This is a koala. It's eating eucalyptus leaves, and so they eat only plants. Carnivores are animals that eat other animals, where they are meat eaters. So here is a tiger, and this tiger's eating some meat right here, you can see, carrying it around. I think that might be some of Carol Baskin's husband right there that he's carrying. And then omnivores will regularly consume either plants or animals. And a good example of an omnivore is a raccoon. Bears are also omnivores, and humans are omnivores. So while we have these different categories of herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores, it's also important to know that there are almost always exceptions where, for example, an herbivore like a deer or a giraffe might actually eat meat if the opportunity arises. So they might eat eggs or mice or something like that if it happens to be available to them. So these are sort of generalized categories, but they don't necessarily have to be totally exclusive. So there are basically 3 things that an animal's diet must contain in order for an animal to stay alive. All animals' diets have to provide chemical energy for cellular processes. So basically that's going to be calories. And the calories are basically just a measure of how much energy there is. And so you have to have enough calories or enough energy to be able to complete the cellular processes that keep the cells in the animal alive. Besides the chemical energy, diets have to have the specific organic building blocks that are required for creating proteins and macromolecules. So diets need to include a bunch of specific things that are going to help the cell make all of the materials it needs. And then there are essential nutrients, which we're going to talk about in a second. Okay, so for essential nutrients, what it means to be essential is essential materials or essential nutrients are any materials that are required that the animal can't make itself from something that's more simple. So sometimes an animal can consume simple molecules that it can use to create larger macromolecules, but in some cases, if the required materials have to be consumed in their usable form, then that's when they're called essential nutrients. So, and if they are essential nutrients, by definition, that means they must be obtained from the animal's diet. There are 4 classes of essential nutrients. There's essential amino acids, which are used to build proteins. There are essential fatty acids, which animals use to create cell membranes, enzymes, and other structures. There are vitamins that can be used as coenzymes, or they might be used in blood cells or as antioxidants, for example. And there also could be essential minerals, which have a series of diverse functions in physiology. So a couple of good examples of essential minerals are iron or calcium. So we're going to go through some of these sort of one at a time. In terms of essential amino acids, animals require 20 different amino acids in their diet. They can synthesize about half of these from molecules that they get from consuming different things, but the remaining, I think it's 10 or 13 of them, are essential amino acids, which again means they have to be obtained from their food in the form of the amino acid. Meat, eggs, and cheese, these things that you typically think of as containing proteins, are some types of food that provide all the essential amino acids that animals need. And they are then, because that they have all of the essential amino acids in them, they're considered complete proteins in a diet. So for vegetarians or for vegans, you can see that this is all sort of coming from animals in one way or another. Cheese is from milk, eggs are from chickens, and meat obviously is the meat of another animal. These are complete proteins, and it's harder to get all of the amino acids you need when you are a vegan or a vegetarian. So most plant proteins are incomplete. They don't have all of the amino acid composition. But if vegetarians or vegans eat a variety of different plant proteins, then they can pretty easily obtain all of their essential amino acids. I'm not going to spend as much time on essential fatty acids. Typically, animals can synthesize a lot of the fatty acids that they need. But again, for essential fatty acids, these have to be obtained from the diet. And they include particular unsaturated fatty acids. So you don't need to worry about what exactly those are. I'm not going to test you on that. But typically, it's not difficult to obtain the essential fatty acids in your diet. Vitamins are organic molecules that are required in the diet in very small amounts. So that's actually kind of the definition, is that vitamins are required in small amounts. And there are 13 essential vitamins that animals need in their diet. Some vitamins are synthesized or created by bacteria that are living in our gut. So these are mutualistic bacteria that live in our gut, and they actually create vitamins. And because of that, we don't need those in our diet. So those are non-essential. In some cases, though, when we take antibiotics if we're sick. We have a bacterial infection. We might take some really powerful antibiotics that actually knock out some of the bacteria that help us synthesize vitamins. And if we do that, then we have to supplement our diet with additional vitamins because we don't have those bacteria that are helping us make them anymore. Vitamins are typically grouped into two different categories. Those are fat-soluble and water-soluble. This is important because people typically think that taking vitamins is super good for your health. And it can be, but it can also be really harmful. So depending on which type of vitamins you're taking, if you're taking a lot of water-soluble vitamins, that basically means that if you take too many of those water-soluble vitamins, those can easily be eliminated from your body through excretion in your urine. But if you take a lot of fat-soluble vitamins, those will build up in your fat cells, and they can become toxic and even potentially kill you. So you need to be really careful about making sure you don't take too many fat-soluble vitamins that are not necessary. So here is a list of different water-soluble and fat-soluble vitamins. So these are the ones that you have to be careful of not sort of taking way too many of. It's okay to get them in your food. You really only run into problems with fat-soluble vitamins when you're taking them as supplements and you're taking them in large amounts. And here's the water-soluble vitamins. So for your exam, I would probably just ask you to know maybe 2 water-soluble vitamins, 2 fat-soluble vitamins, and know something about their dietary sources, how they function in the body, and what it looks like if you don't have enough. So pick 2 water-soluble vitamins and 2 fat-soluble vitamins, and if you know that, then you should be set for the test. Okay, minerals are inorganic nutrients, so they are not found in living things, and they're usually also required in small amounts, similar to vitamins. So minerals are often involved in maintaining homeostasis. So if you take too many of some minerals, or you don't take enough of some minerals, that can disrupt some of the homeostatic balances in your body. For example, a really good example of this is the thyroid. The thyroid uses iodine to create specific hormones that it releases. And when you don't have enough iodine in your body, if you're not consuming enough of iodine in your diet, then it can cause overactivity of the thyroid. The thyroid is in your throat. So if the thyroid is trying to make hormones, but it isn't able to make them because it doesn't have the iron that it needs, then it becomes more and more active, which makes it swell, and it causes this deformity called a goiter. That's caused by an overactive thyroid when there's not enough iodine. I don't know if I said iron earlier, but I meant iodine. Sorry. And here are several minerals. Again, I'm totally okay if you just want to learn 2 different minerals. Some of the easier ones are iron and iodine. You probably already know where the dietary sources are of those. You might be able to figure out, or you might already know what the major functions are in the body and potentially symptoms of deficiency. So 2 minerals I want you to know, and 2 fat-soluble and 2 water-soluble vitamins I want you to know for the exam. Okay, so we're going to finish this PowerPoint off with malnutrition and what are some of the symptoms of malnutrition and how does it happen. So malnutrition is a failure to obtain adequate nutrition. So it could be in several of the categories we talked about before. There are 2 main types of malnutrition. One would be deficiencies in essential nutrients. So remember, the essential nutrients were amino acids, essential fatty acids, vitamins, and minerals. Or another type of malnutrition is undernourishment, which is basically you're just not getting enough calories, not enough chemical energy to sustain the cells in your body. So malnutrition can have negative impacts on health and survival. So that means if you have severe malnutrition, you can die. And it's often found in areas where there's not very much variation in the diet. So there might actually be enough food, but it's just not varied enough, and so you're not getting the specific vitamins, minerals, fatty acids, or amino acids that you need. So here are some examples of deficiencies in essential nutrients. Deficiencies in essential nutrients can cause deformities, disease, and death, as we mentioned before. And so there's different ways of sort of that animals try to achieve making sure they're getting these essential nutrients when they are deficient. Cattle, deer, and other herbivores, including some birds, sometimes will lack essential minerals in their diet, and they can obtain those minerals that they need by licking rocks or eating clay or something like that. So sometimes animals will be doing these weird behaviors, like this little goat is licking rocks, and it's picking up salts and phosphorus from the rocks. It only needs small amounts, but if it's lacking those nutrients, those minerals, then it can pick them up that way and sort of balance out its homeostasis. Another way that you can have a deficiency in essential nutrients that's pretty common is protein deficiency. It happens a lot in human children that aren't getting these essential amino acids in their diet. And one thing that happens when there's not enough protein or amino acids in the diet, because there's not a lot of meats or animal products, is that you actually get edema in the belly or swelling, water retention in the belly, and that's why you often see these kids who in many ways look like they're starving, but they have a great big extended belly, and that's from protein deficiency. And finally, we can talk about undernourishment, which again is they're just not getting enough calories, not enough chemical energy. Some of the things that can happen to an undernourished individual basically means they're starving. They end up using up all their stored fat and carbohydrates in the body. They will break down their own proteins and use that as energy. They lose muscle mass. They can suffer protein deficiency of the brain and have some brain damage, or they can die. So it's a really horrible situation when there's not enough chemical energy in someone's diet. Okay, so that's the end of that lecture, and I will be giving the next lecture on the stages of processing food.